Chat's working today?
Oh gosh, let's hope so. Let's test it out right now. I've been working on behind the scenes a little bit. Okay. All right. YouTube's working. Okay. Let's see. Can you all chat? If here come a couple people into the room. We are live. Allow participants to chat. I think I've got that working. Let me know if you can send to everybody. Hello, hello.
Right
Hello,
now, I can just see to Dr. Brian Sanders privately, and I don't have any other options.
dear. Well, that's a fail. Sorry about the chat not working. I don't know why it's not working. I think there's just too many. There are too many settings going on at my school. We're just having trouble getting them all worked out in advance. So let's kick it off. We got a good sized room here. We are live on YouTube in case you want to tell your friends. And if you want to rename yourself, go ahead in the Zoom window. Just rename yourself. Give yourself a proper title or an at for your handle on Twitter, etc. Um, so we are learning to pivot, and we just keep coming back for more and more and more. So we left off last time thinking about how we might actually start putting some of these great ideas that we're having here towards publishing something and putting out a thought paper and putting all our names on it and saying, hey, uh, this is some of the best thinking that we have right now, and would you like to consider it for how you might, first of all, rethink what you're doing in your classroom now? Classroom, of course, is a loose term these days, and but also looking ahead to how because we all get frustrated and we certainly make change. We're all here because we make change, right? We're all about rethinking, and we do that really well in our personal relationships with students. But how do we go beyond that? Like, what are like, so this kind of a format, broadcasting it, archiving it, making it available for others, that's one way. And then influencing change at our school, that's another way. But maybe we should start reaching back a little bit, and that's where the idea came to. Well, what if we look at teacher prep? Like, what kind of change or influence can we have on teacher prep programs, and how can these ideas maybe be shaped in such a way to influence what's happening as maybe even summer classes are about to launch for up and coming teachers, and certainly in the fall. Um, what can we put out there that they might consider as maybe some guiding principles or some. I know there are plenty of great stories in the things that we've been talking about so far. I mean, we could formalize some of those into some short narratives, a couple paragraphs each, and just really kind of try to encapsulate what it is that we believe in, and keeps drawing us back to this conversation over and over again. It's not just because we want to change things for the kids that we teach. We want to change education, and we want to influence how pivoting happens even before coronavirus, of course, right? Even before quarantine school, we've been working on these things in different capacities and in different contexts. So I'm going to try to take notes, and if you could try to think about like how we might um, sort of aim some of our comments towards, you know, what would be a potential successful approach or question or line of inquiry or way of organizing things that graduate school programs could use as some sort of launch pad or way to just simply begin day one. And like, it's like, where could they rethink how they approach teaching teachers how to be different kinds of educators, versus the traditional stuff that we have well documented, has plenty of problems already baked into it. So, as usual, go ahead and tell us who you are, just as you're about to say something, so we have that context. I'm Dr. Brian Sanders. I currently work in an elementary school as an academic technology specialist and spent over 20 years prior working in high school English, blending all kinds of different experimental approaches with technology and other things. And my my focus with the doctor title is really just only because I just kind of kept going and wanted to find something else to do. And so I wrote a dissertation trying to find a way to blend critical theory, technology, and constructivism. And so that's what has sort of launched me into this new way of thinking about things and looking for my tribe of people. And here they are. I found them. So let's do something. Let's change and learn how to pivot together. So jump on in with some ideas that you're thinking about, you think we could use towards changing graduate school.
Hi, everyone. So Dr. John Wick here, kind of like Brian, I just kept going and going and going. My focus is on teaching and learning theories, and like Brian, also with critical pedagogy. Just that's my main focus on everything that I do. I've had over 13 years in Catholic education. I'm currently a middle school science teacher. I've been a principal, vice principal, tech coach. Like, if the job's out there, I've pretty much done it. But to address Brian's kind of quandary, like what can be done in these teacher prep programs, which I've also taught in graduate education teacher prep courses. So one of the things that I found is really using the methods that we want our the teacher candidates to use in the classroom, teaching the teacher prep courses using those exact same methods. I found that when I was teaching my graduate courses, the students were amazed that, number one, I was using Flipgrid, or I was using technology, or I was the first one who was using animated GIFs in the Canvas thing that's going on. They're like, we've never seen this. No one's ever filled out the calendar before. And these tools are all there. And the problem is, the way we're teaching our teacher candidates is largely lecture. It's like we're lecturing them about not doing the type of pedagogical methodology that we're using with them. So until we could actually model it and make it successful, it's hard to say, hey, don't lecture to your class when all you're getting is lecture. And that's just my thoughts on that. Mm.
Hey, Brina here. Sorry I was late. I was lucky enough to be in a different Zoom room, and you know how they go right to the minute. So thank you for letting me be late, team. I agree with you completely. And I think the hardest thing for my undergrad and grad students in education was when I'm actually doing it, they literally say, I'm very confused. What are you doing? Do you feel, yeah, okay, so I'm seeing some nods. They literally get very defensive and they question, they ask a lot of questions, and then you encourage their questions and you get through that little phase. And then they say over and over, oh, this is what I do with my students. Because I think there's a lot of great teaching going on across the country, or in their minds in some of the undergrad cases, but to actually experience that kind of learning is so important, because there's a lot of risk taking, a lot of failure, a lot of mistakes, it's not easy, just putting it out there. Anyway, that's my 2 cents.
I'll jump in. Sue Spellman can. I'm a psychologist and a retired school counselor, and was in education for many, many years. One of the things that I thought about as you were asking those questions, and I'm not sure that that a lot of people tend to think about this, but that in every classroom, whatever that looks like, online or off, not necessarily in the classroom, but collaborating with that classroom in some way, I believe should be a school counselor. And I do believe that it's going to be more important now than ever. And how we do that, having a school counselor in the room, and I'm so happy that you have me in this room, even though I'm retired. I think having that person to work along with you and collaborate with you, whether it's whichever way it is. And Twitter is a great way to collaborate, really. When I found when I was in the school, sometimes when you're trying to do something in your own building, everybody's doing this and that and the other thing. And I would put out a tweet to get that information, and it would be like 5 seconds later. Boy, do I like that. I like that information coming quickly to me, that I don't have to wait for 10 days or 5 days to get some of the resources or the things that I need. It's not as easy on Twitter as it used to be. Twitter felt like a much smaller world when I first got involved. I find that hard to believe, but it did. But it was a more collaborative place, I think, than it is even now. But you have to find your own way to make that happen, and to make those connections, so that if you directly send that tweet to someone, usually you get a response, whereas before you could just put it out there. Anyway, I think it's important that we all work together. It's a process, and we have to trust that process. And if we trust that process, we'll make it easier for the future educators that are coming along now. Thanks.
Say, Susan, to your point, I think as we explore distance learning right now, the social emotional aspects of teaching under COVID are so huge that we have to be relying on our counselors and others to do that. Hi, everybody. I'm Michael Walker. I'm secondary digital learning specialist in Minnesota. And I had the benefit 35 years ago, 37 years ago, actually, during my undergrad, to have a professor who actually used Pappert's Mindstorms as a book that we use for methods class, which, I mean, it was amazing to think about that. But we taught using metaphors, and we had to come up with metaphors we all taught the cell. And so to kind of have that as the foundation for my teaching background, I think was a huge thing, and maybe why I'm doing what I'm doing today. But as we've been teaching graduate classes in our district, we have offerings and we've utilized books like Innovator's Mindset, Design Launch, John Spencer's book on design thinking, and Maker Ed, as a way to get people to think about shifting their teaching practices. And I think when you're thinking about whether it's undergrad or graduate courses, things like those types of books, or Gary's book on Maker Ed, Gary Sager's book, those are the kind of things I think that will get people thinking differently about teaching in a way that is different from the way that they were taught in the classroom, and kind of move the needle a little bit.
I just wanted to say hello real fast to John Carippo and Allison Powell, 2 new guests. So don't feel obliged to jump in right now, but just want to acknowledge you. Hello, hello.
Hello.
Well, I thought I'd piggyback a little bit on what Michael said about books, since I've got, I want to announce the book discussion that I'd like to launch. I'm Bob Irving. I teach middle school computer science here in South Carolina. I used to be a high school English teacher, Brian, many years ago. So I've gone the last few years thinking I was the only person on the planet that had gone from English over to computer science, but I'm finding out I'm not. So yay. I'm a Seymour Papert disciple. So great, Mike, to hear about your using Mindstorms in your class. That was amazing. I've got it prominently displayed and a well-thumbed copy on my bookshelf. And I had to I had the pleasure of meeting him once, which was a highlight of my career. Um, and speaking of technology, I just wanted to, I don't know if this was quoted here, but somewhere Alan Kay, who is one of the godfathers of computer science, said, technology is anything that was invented after you were born. So we always talk about, well, technology is allowing us to do whatever, well, at some point a typewriter was technology and the television was technology. So, they're tools. That's all that we get to use. So I have an online persona named Crouching Python, and I'm getting ready to launch a Twitch channel, which is going to be online learning. So I was kind of moving online before all this happened, and this has just accelerated it. So I'm kind of excited about that. And I would like to launch a book discussion with anybody who's interested on Mitch Resnick's book, Lifelong Kindergarten, which I just read and is just amazing, I think. So it's hashtag LKBook, LKBOOK, because Lifelong Kindergarten book was already taken by Mitch Resnick and it's too long to type anyway. So if you're interested, I put something on the Learning to Pivot hashtag. Hit me up and we'll start it. I've never actually run one of these before, so I'm open to suggestions, but I would love to get together with the people that are in this space here and talk about what could be, because I think Brian's right. This is a pivotal moment in history, and it could get really exciting, what's possible. So I'd be very interested in discussing that with anybody who also would like to. Thanks.
So just for those of you joining in, hello, Gary. Hello, Jane. And John, you missed the opening prompt, so I'll just repeat it as well. We're sort of dovetailing from last time, looking at some of the ways that these good ideas, granted many of them we've been talking about and working on for many, many years, how we might try to take this room's energy and ideas and anecdotes and put out and publish together some sort of thought paper that we could aim directly at teacher prep. Could be undergrad as well. That's a good point. I did only mention graduate, but teacher prep programs and courses in general, how we might help shape some of what they're up to, instead of only focusing on our students and maybe changing our schools, but looking back at helping reform and rethink and reshape what happens as teachers are getting trained, so to speak, to become teachers, whatever training means. I mean, I get that that's a complicated phrase in itself there.
Yeah. So, well, it's funny because you guys probably have a similar thing. I like to think I'm new to the profession, but back in '96, I remember that I asked my vice principal, he said, "What do you want for technology?" And I had a Macintosh Performa 5260. You remember the giant one? Like an adult man could barely lift it. And I said, "I want the little adapter card that hooks it to my TV." And he said, "Why?" And I go, "I don't know." But maybe it'll be a thing. We didn't even have the internet in our classrooms in those days. I went through a phase where I was one-to-one Palm Pilots. So that's old school. And I got to see how excited kids were about simple things, like just being able to type their essay instead of handwriting. I had a bunch of 6th grade boys say, "I like writing better because it's not about my handwriting." Just that simple elegance. And then I got to see the beauty of when kids figured out that they could buy a 32 meg SD card and put it in their Palm Pilot and would hold 7 songs. So now they could listen to music while they wrote, right? And I could see how if it was fun to write, to listen to music during a class writing period, I was like, wow, I can really leverage this. And then I went through a kind of a failure period where I got to start a one-to-one high school. We went MacBooks, we were Google on day one, we were project-based learning. And around November, I was having a really hard time because I realized that just giving kids the right tools did not create a utopia, that the teachers had not changed their pedagogy. So I was walking up and down the hallways seeing this. oh, we'll get out the MacBooks when we're ready. I'm like, we're ready right now, man. So that led to 8 or 9 years of a lot of development. And I would love it if Shannon would jump in on this, but like, that's where the Edge of Protocols thing came from, because I realized I need a simple formula that teachers could steal, just like they do for barbecue or brewing beer or gardening. They needed to be able to say, I see what you did there with that triple decker grilled cheese with the Parmesan on the outside. I'm going to copy that. And what happens for teachers is a lot of our lessons are one-offs. Here's my great lesson on paradoxes. Well, what are you doing next week? A whole other lesson that I got to create from scratch. And that puts a cognitive load on kids. And then, I've lived this, you guys, I've lived this. I was a one-to-one Palm guy. I was a tech loving guy. And I rolled out of school and I was like, oh crap, this thing moves really fast. I was not ready for what one-to-one really is, because in my old days, if the kids finished the lesson early, I would just say, read quietly until class ends. You can't do that in one-to-one. That is not going to go well. So I started really adopting this concept of Edge of Protocols, which are a perfect marriage of reusable lesson plans combined with the best of pedagogy and research. So to give you guys a quick example, if you haven't seen some of them, one of my co-author made one called a cyber sandwich, which, how many times have you guys seen this? Turn and talk to your partner. If you ask me and John Wick to talk about your stuff for 3 minutes, you're going to get 9 seconds of us talking. And then when you get out your popsicle sticks and try to scare us into answering, we're going to the wrong part of our brain, right? And so the think, pair, share thing, I like the idea, but at the end I had nothing but this. And then here was the worst part. Once I pulled the 4th popsicle stick, Shannon's like, that group took my answer. And now she's totally out. So a cyber sandwich is just this simple. If your kids have any device, Shannon's going to be on slide 1, a video, a PowerPoint, whatever. Her job is basically do a notice or a DBQ. Read the article, watch the thing, gather some facts, gather some vocab. I'm doing the same thing on slide 2. When we both get our notes taken on slide 1 and 2, on slide 3, we do a Venn diagram. Don't say Venn diagram, because as soon as you say that, the kids will freak out and get all mad. I don't know why, but that's what they do. Then I have the Socratic seminar to talk about what you guys find, what was different, what was unique. Now I'm in the full teacher position, because you guys have all lived this if you've been in a classroom. Kids read an article and they're astounded by this or surprised by that, and they want to talk. And then we wrap it up. Shannon writes a paragraph about her learning. It can be first person, third person. It can be a review. It can be a response to literature. I can do whatever format. And then I write a paragraph. And in about 25 minutes, I get a lot done. And guess what? It turns out this is a great way to go through your teacher induction program or your high school or your college program, because you could say, let's talk about SEL, but I'm not going to lecture it. Shannon, here's a cool article. Dr. Brian Sanders, here's a TED Talk. In 12 minutes, I want you guys to have some notes and be ready to talk. And then you write a review. It's done. So that's a sample of what it looks like in my head when we talk about this, because I'll wrap up with this. Devices. So Dr. Sonny Magana has shown this in his research, and he's a Marzano researcher. You add devices without an improved pedagogy, and the learning is actually going to go down. It's going to get worse, because for God's sakes, at least on paper, they are doing the manual process of imprinting it to the brain. But if they're screenshotting the notes and sharing them like Brian Sanders and I would do, they're doing less work, less, not more. So that's my take so far. I'm loving everything I'm hearing.
I'll chime in. So I'm Shannon Tbaldo. I'm at Loyola Marymount University in Los Angeles, California, where I teach in the teacher prep program going through a master's. So I teach intern candidates who were in the classroom up until March 13th here in California. So I have been teaching Edge of Protocols in my master's level teacher classes, preparation classes, fully online, by the way. And so we've been doing these techniques. So some of the things I wanted to share, and I'm thanks, John, for kind of transitioning us, was teacher preparation has forever changed. Teaching, as of March 13th, in my opinion, teaching will never look the same and should never look the same as it did March 12th. If for some reason we go back at some point in the future and you're doing the exact same thing, you should like it should be over for you as an educator because it is fundamentally going to look different from now on, which means we as educators need to change the way we're teaching. And so I agree with John Wick, where you said we have to model that, because if we don't model it, then our students don't know how to model it. But really not everybody in higher ed, John Crippo and I have been talking about this, not all of our faculty members know how to teach in this capacity. So there's
And
a,
it's different. One-to-one is a
it's-
different animal. It is
it's
not the
totally
same
different.
thing with digital textbooks. It is totally different animal. And
It's-
Brian Sanders,
it's
I don't know
layered.
if I'm esteemed enough, but if you'll let me chat, I'll share some links. So right now I'm blocked from chat.
Yeah, sorry, I got to change some settings.
It's okay.
Real fast, I just wanted to say, based off of what Shannon was saying and what I brought up earlier, I think that if anything good could come out of this, higher education is so slow to change. I mean, even compared to elementary, middle school, high school, they're changing a little bit more rapidly. But higher education, I've been there, I've worked it. I've had professors that I've worked with, tenured professors, all of them saying, well, this is how I do it. This is just how it's going to be. I was pleasantly surprised that the university said, no, you are all shifting and you're doing it this way now. Of course, money drove that, but it's the first time that these people that have held out have actually had to stop and do it. Now, ideally, we would have had more time. It would have been done better. But I think those who had always kind of shied away from it now have actually been forced into it. And like Shannon said, after this, if they're not using those tools, like it's time to really start rethinking, like maybe they should be more into the research side instead of the teacher prep side, in my opinion.
Maybe.
I'm sorry, Brian, go ahead.
No.
I was just going to say, I was on a call earlier today where I've proposed a new certificate program and kind of fast tracking it and was asking for support. And just, I mean, at Loyola Marymount, they were like, yes, this is great. We can't do anything until the fall because we're on summer break and we can't get, buy-in. And so universities are slow to adopt because there's so many processes, and I don't want to say red tape, but there's a lot of processes of like getting things vetted. And I was like, but right now everything's on hiatus. Like we can totally like do so much right now because everyone's in emergency learning. So let's kind of fast track some of these options for teachers to get foundations in online teaching and learning out there right now, and then we can kind of beta test the waters, and then we can write that certificate program in the fall where we can get all the buy-in from the faculty. But it's really tough, but I have been extremely pleased with what I've seen in higher ed, just from our university and other universities. I bet you guys who teach in higher ed have been pleased. It's not perfect. I can't expect everyone to be an online teacher right away, but like all those teachers are really doing their best to handle engagement, assessment, and trying to get away from those digital worksheets and that kind of stuff. And so I've just been really happy with the K-20 space on how. What I don't want is, and I think I mentioned this before, I don't want everybody to come back and be like, I'm an online teacher, this is so great, like I'm totally certified, because there is a pedagogy around being a strong online blended learning hybrid teacher. And I think in an emergency situation, we're reacting to an emergency versus kind of utilizing all of the best practices. So reinforcing those are strong. So thank you for letting me talk today.
So I just want to jump in if I can, Brian. I'm Alana King. This is Tim King, and we're from Ontario, Canada, but we both teach grade 12s. And I'm going to try to not say my subject, because that's what I want to imagine this week is, what if there was no subjects? What if there were no tests? Or just like we heard in Ontario yesterday, what if there were no marks? Kids have already passed or not passed at this point. They can get exactly the same mark on their final report card as they have today. What does it matter? Well, guess what? I've called 6 kids already out of my class. All of them want to keep going. All of them want to keep going. You know why? Because they want the learning. Isn't that exciting?
Crazy
Can you
talk.
imagine? Can you
I like
imagine if
this
those
class.
same kids were going into higher education in your class next year? How would your teaching change? Tim, you want to add something?
Yeah, that's good stuff. And I'm hearing a lot of people talk more and more about those things. No tests, no subjects, no letter grades. Boy, we've been talking about that for years, right? Everyone crazy. Maybe one thing that can help us focus, and I think we mentioned a couple texts, but I'm wondering, because we're here and this is a working session, right? So what would you put on the teacher prep, either undergrad or graduate? Let's just not differentiate right now. What would you put on the teacher prep program reading list? What are the fundamental books? Maybe let's start with books. We can add journal articles and what essays too, but why don't we start with books, seminal works?
So I'm just going to jump in real fast. And the number one book for me ever since I started, Pedagogy of the Oppressed. Just, I think every program should have that.
It's so hard. Can I just jump in though, Brian? Because I think we're jumping. I tried to go to my university, for example, and said, can we have a course about how to teach online for our pre-service teachers? Like where this remote access is not teaching online. Ed tech is very different than online learning. So while I can share course outlines that are all design-based or pedagogical, participatory pedagogy, if we don't name and support our teachers and thinking about different mediums first, like I'd love to take a course in how to learn in Minecraft, but I think I would have to take a whole course, to be honest. Like, and you can do that through an experience, but you can also in higher ed learn through a course. And I think we need some of that first. And I also don't think that we should start by naming books and resources, because I think that we should be creating things and they should be open. And I have a lot of problems with having to pay for stuff, especially for teachers in public education. And so then that's another way we can integrate free and accessible resources in our classrooms. So anyway, I just think we kind of jumped. But I can't even get my dean to even consider an optional course for teachers about how to teach online. I don't know. And I'm going to make Allie talk because she's not talking, but she should talk because she has a little bit of experience on this. So Allie, why don't you tell a bit where you're from and what you do?
Yeah, sorry, I had another emergency going on, so I was trying to listen, but I'm Allison Powell, and I used to work with Verena at iNACOL, which is now called the Aurora Institute, and now run a new membership organization called the Digital Learning Collaborative. So I've helped start a few online schools back in the late 90s, early 2000s, taught online, taught face-to-face. Have done it all in this field, I think, helped set the standards for what a quality online or blended teacher is. And most recently, before I just changed to this new job, we were trying to rethink adult professional learning through using micro-credentials. And just we created our own graduate degree equivalencies because the higher ed institutes wouldn't budge or change at all. And we wanted teachers to learn in the ways that were best for them. Like somebody said earlier, whether it's watching a video or reading an article, but they need that practice in the classroom with the kids. And the theories are great, but until you get in that classroom and actually put them into practice, that's a whole different set of skills. And then having somebody give you feedback, it could be scary, but it was really powerful learning experience for teachers. And so a project we're working on right now, we're about to publish a paper in a couple of months. Heather Staker from Ready to Blend and Tom Christensen from the Christensen Institute and I took all of the skills, every set of standards you could find, and pulled them together to create what are those essential skills for creating a student-centered learning environment, which is what we're doing, whether it's with the technology, without it, and came up with, I think we're at 84 different competencies right now. So this is a huge thing that's not gonna just happen, like Verena said, with just a basic, how do you teach online course? But that's something that we're hearing from schools right now is this isn't, I think language is important too. And this isn't online learning. This is emergency remote, like good luck right now. And so what we're hearing is we need couple hour class, maybe 3 to 5 hours max. And that's what the Digital Learning Collaborative is trying to figure out. What are those essential skills versus, okay, we need an online certification program as well later on. And so how can we connect that with, here's the basic skills we'll teach you and give that information to you, but also how can you go demonstrate and practice that? So we aren't in the same situation in the fall as we are now, because what we're hearing from schools, teachers, superintendents all over the country is this isn't going to end this spring, like whether it's rolling enrollments and rolling quarantines based on where you live, or it might just be a few weeks versus a few months kind of thing. But how do we support those teachers and get them ready? And then for beyond in 2021 and in the future, like how can we change schools and teaching and learning then? So right now it's just everybody's like getting all these resources thrown at them. So I think a paper is good, but something short and easy to digest, because they're overwhelmed, they're confused, they're frustrated, and nobody knows what they're doing right now, except for maybe the few of us on this call and a few others. So how do we like really support them for right now while we're thinking about the future and where this is going to go and how it can change? And so it's an exciting time, but we just have to kind of rethink, like, what can we do right now to support them without continuing to overwhelm them? Was that helpful?
Hey, Allison, do you have first a Twitter feed and or a list of resources for the stuff that you're talking about? Because I would love to see it.
Yes, my Twitter is Allioop. It's ALIOOP. I made it way before Twitter was a thing. So, but we also have, and my chat's disabled too, so that's why I'm not responding to you, Verena. But I can share, the Digital Learning Collaborative just created a resource site for right now. But as soon as, I don't know, do you have that link, Verena? I can email it to you, but I can't post in chat. So
I can't even copy the link out of the chat that you're posting there. It won't let me copy and paste.
Right.
Yeah, same here.
That all on Twitter. I'll try to get the chat fit. I'm glad the stream's working this week, but the chat's not yet. So
blame Brian. I am trying. Maybe I could make a Padlet link, but if you can't copy paste the link, Shannon. Okay.
I got the doc open.
So okay, we don't have to focus on. I guess my only and I think it's probably a fair point to also look at maybe what, we can make some suggestions for what are the kinds of things, the coursework that people might need to grow into this sort of type of learning environment. But I guess the reason why I'm revealing my background as a high school English teacher, I suppose, but I'm just, the book to me is so important because I've been in so many classes where the books were not very engaging, or they were too light, or they didn't grab all kinds of ideas from the class that was reading it together. And so I guess that's my concern, is that if we could certainly do anything we want here, but I think I'm just curious personally then, what are the books? I know that Mindstorms, we all come back to Mindstorms. I know we all come back to Pedagogy of the Oppressed. But I guess I'm just maybe curious, what are the other mainstays of our education philosophy that are found in books that may or may not be taught in teacher prep that maybe ought to be?
Well, I'd like to jump in with two offerings. I will tell you guys that a paper that got shared with me in around 2003, and the title is 17 Reasons Football is Better Than High School, completely blew my mind. And it's interesting because the author, who's an ethnographer, talks about the fact that he doesn't even like football. And he probably should have titled the article 17 Reasons Even Football is Better Than High School, because it talks about the lack of motivation in the classic classroom. And I want to point this out, you guys. This article was written in 1998. and it's in the link there. It's from the University of Michigan. It's a highly solid and well-built piece of writing. And when I saw it in 2003, it immediately created an internal conversation with myself about how do I quit being a worksheet delivery device for my school district? Because that's what a lot of teachers end up being. They give me a series of workbooks and I try to get through the book and I equate that with success. So that's one end of the spectrum for me. It's only about a page long, but it is mind-blowing from a perspective of how to get human children to be engaged in the learning, right? In 1998, we're coming up on 30 years, or sorry, 20 years. And so then the other option is the book that about 2 years ago, Bill Selleck, shout out to Bill Selleck, cool guy if you don't follow him. He shared with me The End of Average by Todd Rose. And this is why I think that even a quick look at a key book is important, because what Todd Rose does is he breaks down the history of how we got here. And you have to understand that the bell curve is a made-up concept. It was invented by the guy who invented eugenics, and it was built to eliminate people from the economy based on certain characteristics that the school decided. As long as we have that kind of an aesthetic underpinning everything else we do, you're going to have teachers that blame parents. You're going to have teachers that blame kids. And I'll end with my college football coach's quote, or a quick anecdote. He would talk about going and visiting with the professors at Fresno State and them bragging about only 7 kids out of 300 would get an A. Look how cool my class is. And the other teacher would say, I've only got 3 with an A. Look how amazing my class is. And he would tell them to their face, if I have 3 guys on the football team that are getting A's because of my efforts, I am not going to be the coach next year. It is unacceptable to have mass failure in my career. And I would argue that you're only looking at an aesthetic difference there. Okay, so it's the aesthetic that we're aiming for underpins almost everything that we're doing badly. So that's my little rant about that. I think to Verena's point, getting over-focused on any one book is a mistake, and waiting to read all the books is a mistake. But I think we do need to understand the history of how our aesthetic of what teaching is and isn't happened, because otherwise you can't counter design for that. You can't look at the alternate perspective. If the back of your head, you're thinking, I need kids to listen to my lecture. How many of you guys have seen this on Facebook? Professors complain that kids won't listen to their lecture in college. I got bad news for you. We have never listened to the lecture. We did a good job of looking at them, but most people were not engaged at any way. So if you're not using the tech right, all that's doing is exposing an institutional weakness.
Gary's been awfully quiet and he was muted last week. Does he want to say something?
It's time for Gary.
Oh, I don't know where to begin.
That's a good start.
I think to John's point, I survived university just fine. And that's part of the problem of all of this, is that we're learning to pivot, but we were all really successful in the old model, right? So I don't really agree with what John said. I think it's deeper than that. I think that just because we came from bad teaching doesn't mean we can't be good teachers. And at the same time, I do see that as a hurdle that a lot of us have to overcome. Maybe that's why I was always a solid 83, not a solid 94.
And Alana, I was a 2.9 GPA all the way through, all the way.
I don't want to admit my my marks in high school, but I agree with you, Alana. I certainly learned how to play the game, and I knew what average I needed to get into whatever I wanted, and then I just took the other ones to get credit to get whatever I needed. And my daughter asked me the other day, because she's in grade 12, so she wanted to know, and I'm like, I'm not telling you. There's no way. So I'm all about formal and informal learning and networked learning. So that was a totally new learning experience. When you actually put value on learning for the sake of learning, my life changed for the better, and my teaching changed for the better. And I don't think there's a book that teaches you that.
No,
I
not
mean,
yet.
it's experience, but I do agree, John, that you do need, obviously you need some basic foundational reading in different ways. And so that would be really interesting, even if you took chapters or pieces.
Right. It doesn't have to be the whole
yeah,
book cover to cover,
like
for
a
God's sake.
pattern.
The right 3 chapters can get the message. And I'll add on to you, Verena, that my experience was very similar. I wasn't in a business as a major because there was a stats class, and I was like, no math, I'm out of here. And so what happened for me, though, was halfway through my junior year, I got into advertising, which meant we were writing radio ads. We were making TV commercials. We were presenting. My GPA shot up to a 4.0, and it stayed there for the last 2 years. So that was an interesting perspective when I became a teacher. I was like, wait a minute, when did I become a good student? It was when I started making stuff instead of just listening to people talk.
Yeah, that's totally a good point. So Brian, even though I came in as the co-host late, are we just gonna summarize our big idea? What do you think? It's 2:47, just checking in.
Yeah, I mean, we can stay open a little bit. We can wind it up. You know, we're having an interesting swirl of ideas today.
Yeah, it's all over. It's hard. That's why.
I mean, maybe we're all just too tired to read a full book cover to cover right now. But I think that I'm just playing. I think that you know, maybe what we're discovering here is that it's actually really hard to agree to what sort of things ought to be put in front of people who are saying, yes, I want to be a teacher. And maybe we don't actually have to agree, but I don't know. There seem to be, and I think, you know, John Carippo, you're right. There are a lot of traditions that we've just decided to keep, and so you have somebody, you know, coming up out of high school or in their early 20s and thinking, hey, I might want to be a teacher. Like, what is that going to look like? Well, you know, we know what happens. It probably looks a lot like what they received, and if they didn't receive an opportunity to make things in school, K-12 or K-16, then they're probably not so apt to view themselves as teachers who know how to nurture and encourage that kind of classroom space and relationship to teaching and learning. So I guess that's right. That point of conflict is right where I like jumping in, because I go for that kind of conflict. That's where I'm attracted to figure out as a creative and an intellectual, like, what should we do right there? And it's messy and it doesn't make a whole lot of sense all the time, but it's probably, if we stick with it, we might be able to figure it out. And I see Jane's raising her hand very, very politely. So I'm going to mute.
Hello, I'm Jane and I'm in London. Well, I'm in Brighton, near London. I suppose my question is that clearly there are philosophical kind of debates about what kind of underpinning theories we are going to draw upon to inform teachers' views on how they should teach. But I'm wondering, as we are here talking about pivoting during this pandemic, whether we can give more guidance on some of the ideas of things that they should do, irrespective of which way they're going to go. So at least some options. And I'm going to go back to AVC again. And if I can show you a little kind of page from a presentation of something that I'm trying to do with English teachers in England, I'd be really interested in your feedback and your views to see if it's something that resonates or that could be useful as a framework. So that's my request, and it literally is one slide. Can I share it with you?
Yeah, I just made it so you can share.
Okay, we're going to go for it now. And now I've got to quickly do what I've just said I've done. Right, going. So then we're going to go share screen. Come on, Mr. Share Screen. I'm going to say those really exciting words in a minute. Is it going to happen now? Come on. Can you see my screen? Those words that were never in our vocabulary before, but can you?
Yes.
Yay!
Even
Okay.
in California.
Woo! Okay, so this then is all my, so this is not my research. It's not my work. It's based on someone at UCL, University College London, called Diana Laurillard, who is a fantastic educator. And it's based on her educational theory, or an educational theory called it's a conversational framework. And I was going to do from current slide. And it's this idea that it was designed to support university lecturers to transition from traditional approaches to teaching and learning and design of activities to a more blended approach. And it's really simple. There is this idea that there are 6 learning types. They're actually called learning types: acquisition, collaboration, discussion, investigation, practice, and production. And how much of one or the other perhaps it depicts or represents your own view of whether you're a constructionist, constructivist, if you are, whatever it is that you are, a NIST. But the idea is that on the back of each of these cards is a little table that says, here's a conventional method, and here are the digital technologies which you could use in order to implement that kind of learning activity. And what happens with them is each individual learning context takes each card and makes it specifically tailored or adapted to their environment, so that you don't have too many technologies that are being proposed to any particular cohort of teachers. And the idea is that teachers, it normally takes place in, if I go back and show you a picture, normally what you do is you storyboard these cards. As you can see, this is the idea. You do it in a face-to-face environment, and you have the cards not facing you in terms of what the technologies are, but facing you in terms of what the learning type is. And you build a learning sequence. So you could imagine that there's lots and lots of acquisition in certain types of approaches, but then in others there's lots of production and collaboration. And then you turn them over and you figure out, oh, there you go, you figure out what are going to be the kinds of activities that you could use in a digital world. So I'm going to stop sharing now, if I can work out how to do that, which is always the exciting bit. And what we're trying to look at is whether in England, if that's useful for our school teachers, because at the moment it's only being used in university settings. So my question is, from you guys who are across the other side of the pond, so to speak, might ABC be a way for us to work together to say, well, these are the kinds of technologies, or these are the kind of things that we might be seeing, and it might reflect some people's approach, because there's going to be lots of certain types of learning activities, and other people might have other learning activities. I'm going to shut up now.
That was a great, quick view into what looks like a great, quick way to just literally pivot. Like, it was this, and now it could be this. I think it could be helpful for many people. Just what you shared there in a couple minutes, I was like, okay, yeah, clear. I can see it. Direct lines between things. It could help push people quite well.
One of the things that I think is that comes up for me a lot, and I'm sure it does for you when you're working with your students, and I'm thinking about even sharing and online sharing and screen sharing, and how we do that and what we do. I have vision problems. I have a progressive eye disease. And so for me, even just trying to see that was so, I'm sure for a lot of older people it's hard anyway, small font, but I think sometimes when we're planning and preparing, we need to think about that. Certainly pivoting to online, there's many things for our kids with any kind of special needs that we need to be super cognizant of, and sometimes I think those things are lost or forgotten, or assumed that we get it, we know, we're there. If you know your students well enough, of course you're going to ask, but sometimes kids don't like to say. I don't like to say that I can't see, right? It's hard as an adult, so I know it's hard for kids. Anyway, just a thought as I was looking at that quickly, I was thinking, holy darn, I can't see that. I wish I could. But if I had a longer period and I could, increase the font, I would certainly be able to. But
Well, Jane, I'd like to say I like what you're doing there in terms of, if you guys have not done much cooking, and I'm going to go off my memory, which is sometimes a bad idea. Cookies must have 5 elements. They got to have oil, flour, salt, leavening agent, and sugar. And if you take one of those out, you might have a tortilla, or you might have pizza crust, right? And so I think what you're translating there is that for a good lesson, you're going to need the elements, right? And that comes before the technology piece. What are kids going to do? What are kids going to discuss? What's the learning flow of it? And that's where I advocate for the pedagogical piece. I would love to talk with you offline about EduProtocols, because I think if you fold that in with what you're doing, what the EduProtocol provides is the framework that teachers can steal and adapt. And I like to use like brewing beer as an example. Mike makes a great IPA, and I'm like, you know what? We could put some coffee in that. And then Brian Sanders is like, oh, coffee stout. And you get that iteration going because we're working off of a template of an actionable thing. We've moved from theoretical. I watched my wife go through 7 Saturdays of lesson design, and she ended up with one lesson that was 30 pages long. And I said, well, that'll be the only one of those you do, because nobody's going to write a 30-page lesson plan, right? So part of the beauty of an EduProtocol is, give me 4 slides. I'm going to take your idea, but I'm going to make it about this. The pedagogical flow is the same. Kids are going to share. Kids are going to create. Feedback's going to be immediate. Those pieces are germane, but Shannon might use it to teach pre-service teachers about SEL concepts. Mike might be doing it to teach computer science, and I might be doing it for the language arts. The basic template is the same. It's like pie is always pie, even if it's chicken pot pie. There's certain elements that are there, and you can riff on it, which actually I just thought, I don't know if there's brisket pot pie. I might need to invent that. But Jane, if you want to touch base with me offline, I would share a whole bunch of stuff that I think you'll really like.
Jane, I really appreciated it as well. And last week when you said it, I was one who went and looked it up, and I actually know some people there that I didn't know I knew, because I found that what you were saying was really resonating. And they're like, of course, but they use it in higher ed. However, my main concern, and we talked about this last week, was I just got an email from the parent council from my school, and they're like, oh, when we go back to school in 4 weeks. and we come from a school setting where cell phones are banned. So they're trying to like raise funds for Chromebooks, and I just let it loose. Like, you can only imagine what I possibly said to this poor lady, who I do feel badly about. She heard what I thought of everything. But teachers aren't ready to think that we're actually going to do this. Yeah.
You got Gary.
All yet, I don't think. So that might be a problem yet. I'm just saying they might not be ready to hear it yet. And now I know Gary wants to talk. Finally, as there's 1 minute left. Good job, Gary.
Oh, I've got a lot to say, but I'll keep it short. Oh, hang on. Let me make sure. Yeah. Okay. The sound is there. The cell phone thing should have never been tolerated in the first place. I wrote articles about this 20 plus years ago. But I think one of the biggest problems we have in education is we need to find a cure for amnesia. All these problems have been solved. They've been solved over and over and over again, even if some of the scenarios you're describing aren't ones that I can imagine myself in. And I can answer Brian's questions. I could give you a list of 10 books right now that every pre-service teacher should read. Because guess what? It's college or graduate school, and people should read books. And because you should read a book with a narrative that goes from beginning to middle to end, written by an expert with passion and clarity. My goal when I was teaching teacher ed was always that the students wouldn't want to hawk their book for 75 cents at the end of the term, that they would want to read it again or pass it on to a colleague. And the books I used were written by experts. They didn't cost $175 and have a parentheses in every sentence that had 15 community college professors' names written in them.
You mean it was readable?
Yeah. And so I could give you a bunch of those, but this is the 30th anniversary of me working in one-to-one schools. That's a generation and a half. It occurred to me last night that kids in America, the richest country in the history of the universe, a country that should be able to afford a cello and a laptop for every kid. Having this issue of whether or not kids have computers and having to deploy them on the cheap in an emergency situation is as unconscionable as hospitals not having masks or PPE. And I've taken a lot more abuse for over 30 years of saying that every kid and teacher should have a computer than the people who have opposed that idea. We need, you know, I find that no matter what the technological change is, people who are good teachers know how to roll with it. They know how to be responsive. They don't see themselves as the center of the universe. They're steeped in not only theory, but theory is valuable, but also a tradition of practice, that they're part of a community of practice, that they recognize that they stand on the shoulders of giants. So when we brought the first computers into schools 30, 40 years ago, the best users of those computers were the teachers who had experience at open classroom in the 70s. And they didn't have problems with equity. They didn't have problems with projects. They knew about classroom centers. And we used to talk a lot, Seymour Papert and I and others, about teacher education. It prepares for people to teach in the future rather than for their past. But I just have to be cranky old man on one more point. When we talk about universities being slow to change, first of all, I think there's greater pedagogical diversity in American higher education than in any other part of the system, even though that's an unpopular view. You can find just about everything, even if high schools are pretending that all colleges are lecture halls with 3,700 people and kids bored to death. But the other thing to recognize is, I've done this before. In the end of January 1988, I pitched Pepperdine University creating an online master's degree program. In May, it was accredited. In June, we had students on campus. That's, again, more than a generation ago. So we keep writing position papers and wondering what might be. And I think what was good is good, to quote one of my jazz musician mentor, colleague, friends. And it would be nice if education returned to preparing people for not just the science of teaching, but the art of it as well. And I think the larger problem facing all of the challenges of education, whether online or in face-to-face contexts, has been that in the mid-'80s, teacher preparation everywhere in the world became more vocational. Policy said essentially, hey, anyone with a face can do this. And the art of teaching was completely removed from preparation, and all that was left was the mechanics. So if we think about this in terms of, you know, air conditioning, repair, and refrigeration, then we have to have protocols and checklists and tips and tricks, as opposed to providing a quality of experience for teachers that we want them to share with their kids, that we want them to know what it feels like to be a learner, whether it's with this technology or that technology or some technology that hasn't even emerged yet. And to recognize that the learner is central to the learning process, that learning isn't the direct result of having been taught, the knowledge is constructed, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. I could go through all those cliches, but I'm finding most of the discussions about what to do completely maddening, and we may just end up with a lot of systems because we're not going to be able to come to consensus about a common good or what's in the best interest of children. I'll just end on this note, which is, you know, I think the longer I'm at this, the longer I think the problems in education are theological in nature. You know, they fundamentally come down to, is this good or bad for children? Is this right or wrong? And I wish there were a lot more discussions of that.
I think that's going to be next week's topic. How did you know?
I'm going to be curled up in a fetal position. Which is how I spent most of the last 2 months.
As long as you keep one arm free to run your Scantron, that's approved, Gary.
Hey, John, while I've got you on the line, since ISTE thinks they're going to be running in Southern California and nobody's going to show up, maybe I should keynote it.
That is a great idea. It's the ideal year for you.
It'll cost them a lot less money.
Yes.
I'm 40 minutes away.
Brian, I like the thought of going back to, a week or so ago when you asked us, if that article that we read about if we could build a school now, would we build what we have, or would we reimagine it? I like that to kind of stay the root of kind of what we're thinking about in this thought paper, because I think that could be the framework of what could it look like if there were no boundaries, if everything was thrown out the window, that the theories and the practices and the whatever that we're working under the constructions now, and kind of go back to what Gary's essential question is this good or bad, and start from that base and write a thought paper of what that might look like. That sounds really exciting to me, just kind of going back on some of the previous stuff that we've talked about.
Yeah.
Brian, there's one more idea, which is, I've often said that the only prediction I'll make about the future is that schools won't enjoy the monopoly on children's time they currently have, meaning they'll spend less time in school than they do today. And one of the reasons why I know that I'm 100% accurate in that prediction is every politician on earth has said the exact opposite for 2 generations. But it's clearly the case. When we were an agrarian society, kids stayed home on the farms with their parents. When parents went off to work, kids went off to school. Everyone I know works from home part of the time. They're figuring out that they could spend more time with their kids now. So the question is, and this is not a cynical one, the question is, why do the kids show up?
Yeah.
How do we gain greatest benefit for being co-located in the same place at the same time?
Yep.
So I don't like this sort of blended stuff because it's always sort of facile and too cute, clever by half. But it's clearly the case that people learn as long as they're awake, maybe even when they're asleep, and that there are different kinds of places to learn and kinds of experiences to have. What are the experiences that are best face to face, and which ones could be great online? Another just sort of, if you want a cocktail party version of this, is something we used to discuss at One Laptop Per Child, which was, if in the 21st century, the world could only afford to provide 5 years of high quality education to every kid on the planet, what would you do? And, you and I were shooting some articles back and forth the last couple of days about great mathematicians and major breakthroughs in physics. And none of that's being discussed. One of the things that we also need to be talking about is the content. We might not just be pedagogical tricks or schedules, but also, to use Seymour Papert's terms, we need a new intellectual diet for children. And so, another topic for discussion is, what does that diet look like? As opposed to the stuff that we've just accepted as a heuristic.
Looking for whenever we go back to school, I believe there will be a surge of, let's go back to school. There will be it's just like back to school every year, that, that 9 days of honeymoon. And unfortunately, right now, every kid in the United States is assimilating to what homeschooling could be like, right? And I believe what you're looking at is a double peak. There's going to be a group that says football, cheerleading, it's all back. And there's going to be another group that's like, this is okay. And about 2 weeks into it, they're going to go, this kind of sucks. We used to do it that way and it was fine. I think, to Gary's point, I think there's going to be it won't have to be a big negative backlash, but there's going to be a group that says, this whole 6 hours in a can thing is not working for me. It's not working for me.
School budgets are going to be defeated. 25% of private schools probably won't reopen. Universities are going to be insolvent, both public and private. No, there's going to be a whole lot of stuff we're not talking about. And some of it's going to be, when people are tweeting, I'm not smart enough to do my second graders' homework. We really shouldn't take that at face value. What they're really saying is, I can't believe how awful this shit is. And I have the ability to walk away from it. And my second grader has to tolerate 6 or 7 hours a day of it. And maybe I'm not going to be such a cheerleader for that in the future.
I think that's exactly it, Gary. Like, no matter how much we try to choose the right shoe for every kid, it's not going to fit every kid. So let's go
And what's
barefoot.
happening is the curtain is getting pulled back on that, right? That you don't have to do this. Another friend of mine was sharing, like Louisiana, when they had the big, I think it was Katrina, they were down for what, 11, 13 months? Never even skipped a beat. Nobody's like, oh, nobody can read in Louisiana because of Katrina. They're fine, because school doesn't make as big of an impact as we would like to think in some cases.
Let me say, you mentioned Katrina. Let me say one ed tech piece about Katrina, which I've been meaning to write about. The first school back after Katrina was a school where they had laptops for a few years, and where the kids were online and they knew how to contact them and they stayed connected. It'd be nice if we ever learned any lessons from anything that happens in the past. But like I said, again, the idea that 30 years on, we kids still don't have computers. I mean, even wealthy families have figured out, if you got a couple kids, you can't do this at home because there's not enough computers in the house.
Right.
Which is one of the reasons why it has to be a basic provision of an American education. But I don't see much discussion about that. I see a lot of the ed tech community giggling about some mediocrity at Berkeley who wrote a book attacking the fantasies of one laptop per child, because these big evil American men wanted to give poor children laptops.
I will say, Gary, that from my network, I'm seeing a lot of districts that are going one-to-one, and I feel like there were a lot of administrators and CTOs that were traumatized by having to go and break those Chromebook carts down. And I believe that it won't be everybody, but I think a lot of districts are going to come out of this thinking one-to-one for any number of natural events, because there were admins that were traumatized by that 3-week window. The problem is, of course, there's no supply now. So if you order 50,000 Chromebooks, you're not getting them. So now you got that problem.
Yeah, but the reason why it should have happened in the first place is, to quote Seymour Papert, is because it's the primary instrument for doing intellectual and creative work.
Right. It's the best possible tool. Right.
Period. And the other thing that the district should be learning is that they don't need their CTOs or their IT team, that the internet works just fine without them. Mm-hmm. And that they've spent an awful lot of money, in the billions of dollars, turning $1,000 laptops into $20.
I tell schools that all the time, Gary. McDonald's doesn't have an IT guy in the back there making sure your filter works. They set it up and they leave, man. They don't have $100,000 a year guy running.
Or spending $300,000 a year to run an attendance program, which I frequently see in budgets. Is that $300,000 better than index cards?
Not sure.
I just want to add, though, that as the parent who has multiple devices, the biggest problem is the teachers without the digital literacy to figure out how to create shareable and accessible content that I can actually use.
Yeah.
So
it doesn't really, you're right, the tool doesn't matter, but and there's no point in spending any money on it, if anyone asks. But
try doing it without it, though.
Well, someone has to communicate something to me, though, Gary.
Yeah. Hey, Brian Sanders, I got to bounce. Thank you for the invite. I'd like to come back anytime if you guys would have me, and I love the conversation.
Welcome back anytime. I'm going to wrap this up. I'm actually, the last 20 minutes kind of brought me back to the radical roots that even spawned this conversation. So I'm grateful. I think we ought to push ahead and for next week and spend the week thinking about. And Gary, I like the way you framed that. Like, what is it good or is it bad? And Shannon, you're right. What we looked at before with the Carol piece, like we should definitely bring that back in. Like, would we build, obviously we know a lot of the things we're not going to carry forward. But maybe there's just something, why are kids showing up to school when they could just be in bed is really interesting to look at. Of course, we've already covered that we have to keep, trying to build a broadband infrastructure for every kid in every household. Anyway, that's not the conversation. We need to work on that no matter what. But maybe just bring us back to what are the most, what we would maybe personally view or in our school settings view as, whatever our context is, what would we do right now in the next week with our students? And people might go, wait a minute, well, that's crazy. You can't do that. Maybe we should keep pushing for those kinds of ideas and try to figure out what's good and bad and what we should toss and what we should look to create for the next version of what school can look like. And I see a couple hands. If you want to bring us out with anything, then I'll be quiet.
I was just going to comment, trying to get back a little bit to what do teachers need to know, or whatever that conversation was. And you'll remember, Brian, a couple of years ago, we were working with the premise, okay, technology exists. There are things we would like to do pedagogically that we could not do before technology. And so what are the pedagogical things that we can now do with the technology? For example, we can collect, one of the things that we set up was a digital library where the kids' work that they did was submitted to the library for other kids to reference and to use. It caused a lot of consternation with the faculty because they were fixed into, this is my assignment. How can you take what the kids have done and put it in the library? The kids will just copy. But in fact, if we want them to learn how to research and look and cite properly, they should go and look at other kids' stuff. It adds value to the work. So one of the things that the technology does immediately is it adds value to the kids' work because we can now make it a part of the learning process. That is something we could not do easily before, because I tried and it was not an easy kind of thing. Having the kids take ownership of their learning can be done with technology in ways we couldn't do before. One of the things that we tried to do was, and I'll use the old term grade book, not because we're doing grades and that kind of stuff, but if you look in traditional settings, the grade book belonged to the teacher. What we did with technology is we had the child be responsible for the grade book, so that the kids learning from K through 12 followed the kid. It didn't stay in some person's record book someplace. And so when you were looking at a kid going from K through 12, maybe they didn't get addition in a particular spot, but that was still in that progression, and people could look at it and say, oh, well, maybe now you're ready to do that, or what are some other ways we could look at it? And so I think we want to, at least I want to look at what are the pedagogical shifts we can make. One example that we've just done recently is that in the assessment, the kids came up with standards that added value to the class. So it's kind of like at the end of Algebra 1, how is next year's Algebra 1 class better because you were there? You know, what did you add to the community of knowledge so that a person coming next year could use that tool or that understanding that you gained to gain better understanding? We've never done those kinds of things because, for one reason, it was too difficult, but technology opens all of these avenues to allow us to explore some of these amazing pedagogical tools and ideas that weren't available before. So that's one of the first things I would do if I were at a university class, would be discussing with the prospective teachers, what are the learning opportunities you want to give kids, and how can technology provide that where you couldn't do it without the technology. And then I think the second thing would be, what do you need physical presence for? I think one of the participants brought that up. What's best done in person and what's best done using technology? For the first time, we have a window where this conversation isn't being poo-pooed like it has been in the past.
Cool. I think to piggyback on that, Joe, one of the classes that I'm proposing for our staff PD this summer is applying the lessons of distance learning to improve future practice. I think one of the things that we've seen, and I know in my district, is that people who may have not embraced technology necessarily have been forced to really ramp up their understanding of how to use different tools and things like that, and hopefully do things in a pedagogically sound way. And so, and Gary, just so you know, your 11 points about how to be a successful online teacher. Those will be part of that class. So
and if you need a 12th, I'll make one up.
Hey, so I'm going to close us out for today. I think actually this group is really interesting in that it seems that we have this very common core and also sort of an inclination to work at opposite ends of where that goes. Like there's this practical, what's tomorrow, what's the next week, what are the next few months, and then there's that abstract of like how do we gather momentum and just really change things. And again, of course, acknowledging that we are suffering from memory loss. You're right, Gary. So that, I guess that's the core center here. We are the memory bank trying to figure out how to turn this into something finally, perhaps, to change things that we already should have changed long ago. So so that's it for today. Learning to Pivot. We'll be back next week. I hope you come. You're going to get an invite, whether or not you want one.
have a good week, everybody.
Thanks.
Stay safe, everyone.
Stay sane.
And stay inside.
Yes. Bye-bye. See you, Gary. Hope to see you next week.
Oh, I've been direct messaging you.
Come on.
No,